I'm a much nicer person now.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
It's a scenario that baby boomers grew up with. The sinister KGB agent, the daring, dashing intelligence officer, Cold War capers, James Bond thrillers, much intrigue, and romance. The only drawback was the possibility of a nuclear disaster lurking around the corner. The real world is much different. Every day, several thousand U.S. government employees troop to work in this modest cement and glass 7-story building just outside Washington, D.C. It could be a branch office for IBM or Procter & Gamble. It is, in fact, the headquarters for the Director of Central Intelligence, America's chief spy. There's neither cloak nor dagger at CIA. In the entrance, there's a statue of the father of CIA, William Donovan, a profile of long-serving director, Allen Dulles, and chiseled on the wall the biblical quote he saw as justification for spying, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Few outsiders have gotten this far, let alone going through the key punch turnstile as we did one recent Sunday afternoon, walking down the marble hall of honor past the portraits of former directors, including the 9th, George Herbert Walker Bush, and up 2 flights into the top-secret Network Management Center. This is the agency's data processing center. Every message to and from the agency's worldwide network goes through this maze of computers, including a Cray supercomputer capable of executing 1 billion calculations a second, put millions of messages and reports at the fingertips of agency analysts. While the CIA's technology may be state-of-the-art, its original mission has become outmoded. For more than 40 years, the standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union guaranteed a vital role for intelligence gathering and left unchallenged its $30 billion price tag. After years of concentrating on the Soviet threat, the intelligence community gets mixed reviews on its performance. It seriously misread Soviet economic trends, says an outspoken critic, Senator Patrick Moynihan, a longtime member of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
This is the central fact, that for 35 years, the Central Intelligence Agency, and you love those guys, but they collected everything there was to know about the Soviet Union, excepting the fact that it was falling apart. Our presidents were systematically told the Soviet Union was a maturing industrial society that had the capacity to maintain the size of the military, which it did have, and we were accurate about that. But we were wrong about the fact that it couldn't maintain it. And secondly, that it could carry on international adventures indefinitely, which also it couldn't do. Had our presidents known, our policy could not have been what it was.
Richard Helms, director of the CIA during the Nixon presidency, takes exception to Senator Moynihan.
Let's take a look at the Cold War. Who won it? The West. And what did we know? We knew practically everything about what was going on in the Soviet Union.
Except the budget.
This is the thing that is argued about. Senator Moynihan has raised this point. The best economists in the United States and the free world were all used to work on that Soviet budget. Some of the time we had it quite right, some of the time we had it quite wrong. Nobody had it right all the time, and that includes Senator Moynihan.
Whether the agency got it right or not, the target was clear-cut: the Soviet Union, along with its satellite countries in Eastern Europe. But with the unraveling of socialism in one country after another, and the Kremlin in turmoil, there are new targets. Other world hotspots demand attention and require different kinds of spies. The CIA is at a critical juncture, and the question is whether it is up to the new challenges. James Schlesinger has held many government portfolios, including a stint as Director of Central Intelligence.
The world is quite different, not only in terms of foreign policy, but in terms of intelligence. The Cold War was a period of great simplification. Not only did you know basically how the world was divided between the Soviet Union and the United States and their allies, but that in the world of intelligence, all that one was really looking for was the accoutrements of this grand confrontation. Now we are moving into a world which is much more complex, which is much more subtle.
Congressman David McCurdy, who chairs the House Intelligence Committee, says the new complexities will require new skills.
It's easier during the Cold War to focus your primary resources on the Soviet Union and to build large systems and use technology to try to get all this data about the Soviets. But it's another thing to have people that are that understand the region, understand the economics, the politics, the culture, in order to report back trends and developments.
Such experts will be vital to help prevent, or at least anticipate, volatile regional conflicts. Admiral Bobby Inman is a former Deputy Director of Central Intelligence.
Now what you worry about is somebody going to fire a ballistic missile across borders to hit a country 300 miles away, 400 miles away with a weapon of mass destruction. How do you alert them before it happens that may occur bolt out of the blue? And how do you plan to try to deal with that kind of problem? It's a whole new challenge that we've never dealt with in these last 45 years, but it's a real challenge for the late 90s.
The U.S. didn't have to wait until the late 90s for its first major post-Cold War confrontation. The Persian Gulf War in many ways exemplified the challenges U.S. intelligence faces in the new era. In what many observers consider a major failure, the intelligence community did not predict Saddam Hussein's plans to invade Kuwait.
I think we did not anticipate, we did not have good intelligence of the intentions of a Saddam Hussein. And I think that's a fundamental weakness throughout the community, is understanding intentions as opposed to the capabilities of a military or an adversary.
Senator David Boren, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, believes this failure may have had tragic consequences.
The war might have been avoided if the President of the United States had been told 6 months earlier, this man is perhaps thinking about invading his neighbor, or he's a real threat to his neighbor. He might have then gone to our president might have gone to the king of Saudi Arabia and said, let's think about putting a base here to deter him from this aggression. So a whole range of options were foreclosed to us and to our president because he didn't know in time.
Some observers claim that after Iraq invaded Kuwait, intelligence on the military picture improved.
Once they got underway, the ultimate performance was superlative. Superlative. But we're lucky that we had 6 months to get ready. I'm persuaded from a close examination that the intelligence performance, once we began the war, substantially shortened the war and very significantly reduced U.S. casualties.
But the commander of Operation Desert Storm, General Norman Schwarzkopf, was not nearly as generous. In testimony before Congress last month, the general relayed bitter complaints from his field commanders about the lack of tactical battlefield information.
One of the shortcomings we found is that we just don't have an immediately responsive intelligence capability that will give the theater commander near real-time information that he personally needs to make a decision. I think that the intelligence community should be asked to come up with a system that will, in fact, be capable of delivering a real-time product to a theater commander when he requests that. It could be aircraft, it could be other capabilities, and I leave that to the experts to come up with.
General William Odom, former head of Army Intelligence and director of the National Security Agency, says the delay in getting tactical information quickly to the field is more a problem of management than a lack of technology.
We built up this wonderful technology capability, but we have a lot of residual organizational resistance turning around and dealing with these kinds of requirements.
In other words, we can collect the information, but we can't process it properly.
Absolutely. Well, we can process it properly. What we can't do is get the collection systems to respond to the fellow out there on the ground who wants it down at a low tactical level and get it back to him in the form he wants it very rapidly. There's no technical reason for not being able to do that. The only reason for not being able to do that is institutional rigidity.
General Schwarzkopf also said intelligence community analysts hedged too much during the war.
Although the fundamental intelligence facts that we had were helpful, that the analysis that we received was unhelpful. and it was unhelpful because it ended up being so caveated. There were so many disagreements within the intelligence community themselves. There were so many disclaimers that by the time you got done reading many of the intelligence estimates you received, no matter what happened, they would have been right. I mean, and that's not helpful to the guy in the field.
The White House was quick to counter Schwarzkopf. In a briefing the next day, Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater said, "What the President has said before and still believes is that our overall intelligence was excellent." To other observers, the Schwarzkopf criticism is all too familiar. Senator William Cohen has just completed 8 years' service as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, 4 of them as co-chairman.
Well, we have a proliferation of agencies. We have so many of the services now that have their own intelligence functions that they are either redundant, overlapping, and certainly not sharing that information.
Too many agencies, too many disclaimers, and maybe not enough good old-fashioned spies. Some experts say American intelligence suffers from an unrequited love affair with high-tech intelligence gathering, overhead satellite photography, and electronic eavesdropping, what's called in the trade national technical means. A satellite dish on the CIA grounds makes the point. Nearby is a statue of the Revolutionary War hero Nathan Hale, who was executed by the British for spying. The professionals say American intelligence needs more Nathan Hales.
I think that there has been a tendency to use the national technical means as a crutch. It was less damaging in some ways when we had the international confrontation. And the reason for that is that one can count the number of silo holes in the Soviet Union. One can see how far they are proceeding with their ABM defenses without understanding their motivations.
We have to do far better than we've done in the immediate past with our human assets and our human activities, because when you have Eastern Europe and Soviet Union in flux, where you have the Middle East in flux, you don't sense the mood of a bazaar from a satellite 100 miles in space. To do that, you need human beings.
George Carver is retired after a career at the senior levels in the CIA, including many years in the clandestine services, the department that recruits spies.
You can't whistle up Farsi speakers overnight. You can't whistle up people who speak fluent Iraqi-type Arabic who can blend into the scenery at Baghdad on the 2nd of August, 1990. If you want them, you better have thought of that the 2nd of August, 1980.
But even spies have their limitations. Former Director Richard Helms says they're only human.
I'd just like to point out that when newspapermen get smart and say, we ought to know about Saddam Hussein's intentions and so forth, they sit right here in Washington with all kinds of connections, yet they don't know what President Bush is going to do about a certain appointment or about a certain move. So why should the intelligence community be able to read into the mind of somebody like Saddam Hussein? Maybe they're going to have a good connection. They're going to try, but it's not guaranteed. And after all, I'd like to point out that God did not give man the gift of prescience, and that includes intelligence officers.
For years, intelligence officers have been trying to read the minds of heads of state. The next subjects may be heads of foreign industry. The U.S. already collects economic and financial data on a broad scale. The question now is how far should the U.S. go to acquire corporate business and high technology secrets?
There's a whole new area going to open up here, which is economic competition among the Japanese, the European community, and the United States. And then if we're going to be competitive, we've got to be able to protect our own trade secrets, our own development secrets, our own R&D, so that we have a chance of being competitive. If these fellows are going to be permitted to steal us blind, we're going to be at a distinct disadvantage. There's a big counterintelligence problem to be run here.
But by tradition, Americans are reluctant to have government involved in private enterprise.
For the U.S. government to get into the business of technological intelligence raises all kinds of questions because of the laws under which we operate. Laws quite different from those of our competitors. I mean, neither Mr. Sherman nor Mr. Clayton was Japanese. And if you acquire technological intelligence, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to give it to General Electric as opposed to General Motors? Are you going to publish it in the Wall Street Journal?
Collecting business intelligence, recruiting third world spies, these and other new challenges will face whoever becomes the new director of the CIA. The director of Central Intelligence wears 2 hats. Wearing one, he runs the Central Intelligence Agency. With the other, he nominally presides over the rest of a sprawling intelligence bureaucracy, and most of that is dominated by the Department of Defense. Taken together, collecting intelligence costs the federal government $30 billion a year. With a government-wide budget squeeze, the intelligence community is facing pressure to slim down.
Downsize. What does any big $30 billion enterprise do when it turned out to produce one Edsel after another Edsel after another Edsel? Downsize. Don't look for new, silly, quasi-Cold War efforts like, find the narco-terrorists or steal the economic secrets of Albania.
But they're offering that to us right now as new challenges.
That's a normal institutional thing to do. It's called institutional maintenance in social science. It's not unusual, but they ought to fight it.
Few other insiders are willing to see such budget cutting.
You're still going to have a defense budget that's on the order of $300 billion a year. I would assert that spending 10% of that to understand what's happening in the outside world is not an unreasonable target for the U.S. to undertake.
As it turns out, only a small percentage of the intelligence budget goes to the CIA. 90% of it goes to the parts of the intelligence community controlled by the Pentagon and the Secretary of Defense. That plunges the Central Intelligence Director right into a classic Washington power struggle.
I would like to point out that the big gorilla on the field in Washington is the Secretary of Defense. All these other organizations work for the Secretary of Defense. They're paid by him, and their fitness reports are made out by him. Therefore, he has a great deal of power over what they do. So it is very hard, unless he's willing to cooperate in this endeavor, to put anybody over him that's going to have any power to change anything in the intelligence community.
Senator Boren warns that cooperation between military and civilian intelligence networks will be essential in the next decade.
In the world 10 years from now, as we look into the next century, the United States is going to have fewer and fewer troops positioned all around the world. This means you're going to have early warning. You're going to have to be able to move very quickly into a hot spot where you don't have troops on the ground. And your civilian intelligence and your military people are going to have to be able to work together very, very closely. The civilian intelligence community is going to have to be able to tell our military commanders in short order the kind of information they need to operate. So you can't have two separate worlds, one military intelligence and one civilian. You're going to have to bring them together in a much closer working relationship than we've had in the past.
The new Director of Central Intelligence has a third task almost as important as managing the bureaucracy and its budget. It is maintaining the intelligence community's integrity. During the Cold War, intelligence officers often operated on the fringes of law and morality in the name of national security. Scandals and congressional investigations were almost routine. The Iran-Contra probe is a continuing example. Morton Halperin was a former National Security Council staffer in the Nixon administration. He now runs the Washington office of the American Civil Liberties Union.
You never can preclude abuses by intelligence agencies, and therefore that is a risk that you run if you decide you have intelligence agencies. I think there is very real tension between a clandestine intelligence agency and a free society. I think we accepted it for the first time in the Cold War period, and I think in light of the end of the Cold War, we need to assess a variety of things at home, including secret intelligence agencies, and make sure that we end the Cold War at home as we end it abroad.
We've just been lucky in the United States. We've got vast oceans on both sides that have been protecting us all these years, so we've been, up until comparatively recently, able to say, oh, well, we don't need all that stuff. We can have everything out in the open and so on. But let me just point out that when the intercontinental ballistic missile came into being, and there are lots of them in the Soviet Union, and they're still aimed at the United States, this changes our vulnerability, and we certainly need a good intelligence apparatus.
Engraved on the wall of the CIA lobby are 53 stars, one for each of the agency's heroes who died in this nation's secret wars. It is the nature of the business that even now, in some cases many years later, not all the names are public. And so it is with an intelligence community in a democratic society. The public will never have all the secrets. But as the Cold War fades, the confirmation hearings for Robert Gates as Director of Central Intelligence offer an opportunity to review the tasks and performances of America's secret intelligence organizations.